The night sky was calm black, endless and deceivingly silent. Flight 472 had just crossed Sri Lanka's airspace, heading toward Perth, cruising smoothly at 37,000 feet. Inside the cockpit, the hum of the engines was the only sound steady, mechanical, reliable. But somewhere deep within the clouds, fate was quietly rewriting its plan. At 2:17 a.m., a strange flicker blinked on the navigation panel, a short pulse, then darkness. The first officer glanced at it, thought it was a routine glitch, and continued logging data. Yet within seconds, the calm turned cold. The radio crackled once, then died. The radar display dimmed, and the world outside the windshield turned into an ocean of pitch black. The aircraft was now completely cut off. No contact with ground control, no satellite link, no navigation beacons, nothing but darkness and the faint stars above the horizon. For the passengers, it was still a normal flight, the dim lights, the soft snoring, the smell of midnight coffee. But in the cockpit, silence had become the loudest sound. There is a term pilots use: spatial disorientation. When you lose the sense of direction because there's no visual reference, only darkness and cloud. The plane feels straight, but it's not. And at 37,000 feet, one wrong angle can mean everything. The captain took manual control. He looked at the compass, frozen. The digital horizon, blank. Every instrument, depending on satellite signal, was dead. Only old analog backups glowed faintly in amber light. They had entered what pilots fear the most, a black hole sky. As minutes passed, the temperature inside the cockpit dropped. The air felt heavy with static. Each time they tried switching frequencies, the radio screamed with distorted noise like distant whispers through metal. The captain's hands gripped the control column, fighting turbulence that wasn't supposed to exist. Lightning flickered somewhere far away, faint but menacing. He glanced toward his co-pilot. Both knew the truth. They were flying blind. Below them, the Indian Ocean stretched endlessly dark and merciless. Without GPS, they couldn't even confirm where they were. They began an old-school method, celestial navigation. Something only veteran pilots remember. Using the position of stars to guess direction, the North Star wasn't visible, but the constellation of Orion was faintly shining in the left window. That meant they were slightly off course, drifting south. Fuel consumption increased. They had less than 3 hours left. The captain switched to the emergency code on the transponder. But even that system was silent. Somewhere between Earth and sky, Flight 472 had disappeared from every radar in existence. On the ground in Singapore's ATC Center, a red light blinked continuously. Signal lost. Controllers tried contacting nearby aircraft to check if anyone could hear. Flight 472, none did. A private cargo jet, flying hundreds of miles away, later reported hearing a faint SOS, just one word repeated through static: altitude, altitude, and then nothing. Up in the air, the cockpit lights flickered again. The engines coughed, just a tremor, but enough to send panic through the flight deck. Oxygen masks hung loose above the pilots, frost forming near the windows. The captain closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't just flying a plane anymore, he was carrying 214 souls through a blind storm between sky and sea. He lowered altitude slowly onto 28,000 feet, hoping to regain radio line of sight. Still nothing. Then something strange. The compass needle twitched slightly, as if responding to a distant magnet. He adjusted the heading westward. Through the darkness, a faint orange hue appeared far ahead, like the first breath of dawn, or maybe the reflection of lightning. It could be land, or another storm, but they had no choice. The crew began calculating fuel manually with a flashlight and notebook, each number scribbled like a prayer. The captain whispered to himself, not words, just rhythm, trying to stay calm. The passengers slept, unaware that their flight was now alone in the vastest ocean on Earth. At 3:24 a.m., the altimeter needles trembled pressure change. That meant something. Maybe they were nearing a weather front, or coastline winds. The captain stared through the window, eyes strained against the dark. Then, a single blinking light appeared far on the horizon. Red, steady, rhythmic, not lightning, not a star. It was a lighthouse. For the first time in 67 minutes, hope returned to the sky. The captain adjusted course, descending slowly toward the direction of that faint pulse of red. But they were still hundreds of miles from any known land. So what was that light doing there? The mystery of Flight 472 had only begun. The red light blinked again, slow, steady, impossible. At 30,000 feet above the Indian Ocean, Flight 472 finally had something to follow. The captain leaned forward, eyes fixed through the frost-covered windshield, heartbeat echoing louder than the hum of engines. Inside the cockpit, the temperature kept dropping. Condensation glimmered on metal panels. Oxygen masks swung like pendulums. Each flash of that distant red glow painted the cabin in a ghostly rhythm, a heartbeat of hope. They had been silent for 74 minutes. No radio, no radar, no contact. The aircraft, once part of an invisible web of control and coordination, now drifted outside the world's awareness. Only that faint crimson pulse seemed to recognize their existence. The captain tightened his grip on the control yoke. His hands trembled, slick with sweat despite the cold. The co-pilot, pale and silent, calculated heading by hand, pen scratching on a damp checklist. Their analog compass had revived briefly, pointing west-southwest toward the light. The sky below turned darker, almost metallic. Layers of thin clouds swept like waves over the ocean, erasing horizon lines. The red glow grew brighter, yet its position never shifted. It wasn't moving as a lighthouse should. It hovered, constant, unblinking now. For a moment, uncertainty replaced relief. Was it land or something else? The captain reduced altitude, descending to 22,000 feet. The engines groaned. The air thinned. The passengers still slept, unaware that outside their windows, lightning crawled through clouds like veins of fire. At 2:58 a.m., the cabin lights flickered. Power fluctuations returned. A low mechanical hum rolled through the fuselage, followed by a sharp metallic snap, a surge through the circuits. The autopilot disconnected itself entirely. The control yoke kicked against the captain's hands. He overrode it manually, pulling back just enough to stabilize. The aircraft dipped, then leveled. The red light ahead expanded, spreading into a faint dome. Through the frost, it looked almost like a reflection bouncing off the ocean's surface. But at that altitude, reflection was impossible. They were staring at something that existed nowhere on their charts. Nothing ever mentioned in their route briefings. A glow in the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from any known structure. The co-pilot tried the emergency beacon one more time. Static. Then, a click, a burst of distorted sound. It wasn't voice. It was rhythm. 5 beeps, pause, 5 beeps again. An ancient distress code. Not from them. From below. The captain's breath quickened. He switched frequencies again, scanning for a pattern. The same beeps continued. Steady, mechanical, almost alive. The plane had locked onto a distress signal broadcasting from sea level. They followed it. As they approached, clouds began to scatter, revealing a faint silver sheen on the water. Moonlight broke through the storm, showing an eerie, calm ocean beneath. And there, in the middle of nothing, something metallic floated, circular, faintly glowing red. It wasn't a ship. Not large enough, not moving either. The captain realized they were directly above it. Whatever it was, at an altitude of 19,000 feet. The red pulse intensified suddenly, flooding the cockpit with crimson flashes. Every alarm inside the plane synced with it, blinking in the same rhythm. For a moment, all electronic systems reactivated. Screens lit up. Navigation flickered alive. Coordinates appeared on the lower display. Latitude, 426, longitude 93.0 G-set. A location deep in the Indian Ocean where no structure had ever been marked. And then silence again. All lights went dead. Engines sputtered. For 11 seconds, the aircraft glided powerless, slicing through dense night air. The only sound was the rush of wind past metal skin. The captain's heart raced. Memories flashing, training simulations. Emergency drills, failures survived only on paper. This was real now. He forced the ignition cycle. One engine coughed, another roared back weakly. A flicker of stability returned. The red glow below dimmed, then vanished into complete darkness, swallowed by clouds. It was gone. The compass spun wildly again, searching for direction. The stars disappeared behind new cloud walls. They had lost their only reference point, both man-made and celestial. Yet something had changed. Their altimeter readings showed a steady climb of cold air rising from below, a phenomenon that only occurs near land masses or large temperature gradients. If that light came from below, it might have marked a small island. Maybe uncharted, maybe abandoned. Fuel calculations gave them 1 hour left. The decision was final. Follow the rising air current west. For the first time, the captain looked toward the sleeping cabin behind the sealed door. Rows of unaware lives, fragile, trusting, floating between life and loss. He took a deep breath and whispered a single thought to himself. Stay calm. Stay human. Minutes blurred into fragments. Clouds thickened. Turbulence returned. The cockpit shook. Pens and checklists flew. Frost crept across the windshield like veins of ice. Every flash of lightning outside revealed the same. Emptiness. At 3:36 a.m., fuel reached its red line. They had to descend. The captain initiated a slow glide toward what he hoped was northwest. The stars reappeared briefly, enough to confirm heading. Then, through the mist, a faint outline appeared below. Irregular. Shadowed, like cliffs or rocks. Land. He extended flaps manually. The landing gear handle clicked, but the hydraulic pump remained dead. Manual extension was the only option. The co-pilot pulled the lever with both hands until a distant metallic thud confirmed contact. The altimeter spun down. 8,000. 5. 3. Outside, the clouds broke open for just a second. A black coastline appeared. Waves crashing against jagged rocks. Foam glowing in the moonlight. There was no runway, just a narrow stretch of flat sand between cliffs. It was madness, but it was also their only chance. The captain angled the nose slightly up, lowering descent rate. The engines coughed once more, pushing their final thrust. Sparks flared as the landing gear scraped the uneven surface. The cabin jolted. Oxygen masks swung violently. A thunderous vibration tore through the fuselage. Then, its stillness. The aircraft slid across wet sand, slowing, creaking, until the nose dipped into shallow water. The engines died completely. Darkness took over once again. For a long minute, no one moved. Then, emergency lights flickered faintly through the aisle. Passengers awoke to confusion, murmurs, disbelief. The cabin doors opened to a cold rush of salt air. They had landed. But where? The captain stepped outside, boots sinking into the wet sand. The air smelled of sulfur and metal. In the distance, faint red flashes shimmered on the cliffs, the same hue as the light they had followed. He turned toward the ocean. Far beyond the waves, deep beneath the surface, something glowed, rhythmic, patient, mechanical. The same pulse that had guided them here. Still alive, still calling. The Silent Mayday wasn't over. The night was heavy with silence. Only the echo of waves touched the wrecked fuselage of Flight 472, half buried in wet sand and salt. The engines, once roaring with power, now sat still, silent metal giants under a moon veiled in clouds. The passengers huddled together, dazed and cold, wrapped in survival blankets. A few cried softly, others stared blankly at the endless ocean, unable to believe they were alive. But the captain's eyes weren't on the people. They were on the cliffs. Far ahead, through a low veil of mist, the faint red pulse blinked again. Rhythmic, deliberate, mechanical. It wasn't a flare. It wasn't lightning. It was coming from somewhere inside the island itself. The air smelled strange, metallic and warm like machinery. The sand beneath their feet was darker than normal, almost magnetic, glimmering faintly under the moonlight. He knew they had landed somewhere unknown. But this didn't feel like any island on Earth. The first light of dawn began to creep across the horizon, painting the sea in a cold silver hue. The captain and first officer began surveying the wreck. The fuselage was intact, but the electronics were fried. Even emergency transponders were dead. The magnetic interference was too strong. Yet what was causing it? They climbed a narrow slope toward the source of the red glow. As they moved higher, the sand turned to sharp rock coated in salt and ash. Strange markings, lines and numbers, appeared etched into the stone. At first they thought it was erosion, but the patterns were too perfect, too deliberate. Symbols, coordinates, warnings. The red light pulsed brighter as they reached the top. It was not a lighthouse. It was a beacon, half buried in rock, blinking with mechanical precision. The casing looked decades old, corroded by salt and time, yet still alive. A plate on its side bore an inscription: Flight Recorder Relay, Project Orpheus, 1983. The captain froze. He'd heard of that name once, long ago during training. A secret experimental network of deep ocean transmitters designed to track black box signals from lost aircraft. The project was abandoned after a prototype vessel vanished, mid-test in the same region. If this beacon was part of that system, it meant they had landed on the same coordinates, where something was lost 40 years ago. He wiped the dust off the surface, revealing a cracked control panel still glowing faintly. Tiny analog meter ticked back and forth, measuring something deep below the ground. The co-pilot looked down the cliffs. The ocean currents moved unnaturally, swirling around the island like a whirlpool. The water wasn't pulling outward. It was rotating inward toward the base of the cliffs. The island was breathing. Below them, waves crashed against jagged stone, carrying a strange sound, not just water, but vibration, like engines, deep, hidden, alive. They descended halfway toward the shore again, where metallic debris shimmered among the rocks. The captain brushed the sand away and froze once more beneath. His hands was a fragment of fuselage, but not from their aircraft. It was covered in coral, engraved with an old registration code, N782R, the missing test plane from Project Orpheus. The beacon wasn't guiding them by accident. It was calling them, repeating the same signal it had once sent for help, unanswered for 40 years, until another aircraft appeared above. Flight 472 had followed the echo of a forgotten Mayday. The captain stood there, waves brushing his boots, staring into the churning ocean. Each time the red beacon pulsed, a reflection shimmered on the surface, something deep below, metallic and vast. Was it the lost vessel, or a machine still transmitting through time? The co-pilot noticed something else. Compasses and watches stopped working completely. The island's core emitted electromagnetic pulses strong enough to freeze mechanical motion. Even the emergency radios blinked erratically. It wasn't just interference. It was attraction. The aircraft they had landed was now slowly sinking, not into sand, but being pulled downward as the tide rose. The island wasn't stable ground. It was part of a larger structure moving beneath the sea. From the cliff's edge, a faint hum grew louder, rhythmic, identical to the pulse of the beacon. The rocks vibrated beneath their feet. The red light flashed faster. Suddenly, the sound of breaking metal echoed across the beach. The tail of the aircraft tilted, sinking halfway into a fissure opening beneath. Passengers screamed. Foam surged around the fuselage. The captain and co-pilot rushed back down, yelling for everyone to move toward higher ground. The waves climbed faster than any natural tide, dragging debris into the sea. He grabbed the emergency flare gun and fired upward, a desperate streak of orange cutting through the gray sky, but the light seemed to vanish too soon, swallowed by the same magnetic distortion. The ocean roared louder. The ground beneath them cracked. The beacon on the cliff blinked erratically faster, then slower, then still, and then silence again. The water stilled. The pulse stopped. The island returned to its eerie quiet. They gathered near the wreck, exhausted, soaked, trembling. The captain looked once more toward the cliffs. The beacon's glow was gone. Only the dull mist remained. He picked up a fragment of metal. From the beach, the same inscription, engraved faintly in rusted steel. Orpheus, listening station 3. And for the first time, he realized the truth. The island wasn't real land. It was the top of a submerged structure, a forgotten listening platform, built to hear the lost, now awakened by their approach. It had been calling for decades, and in the silence of the night, another aircraft had finally answered. The captain looked at the horizon where dawn met the sea, pale, silent, endless. The radio crackled faintly beside him. Static whispered, then a faint voice fragmented by distance. "Flight 472, we hear you." The voice faded, but it was enough to remind them they were not alone anymore. Above them, the first morning light broke through the clouds, painting the sea gold. The world had finally found the signal of a flight that refused to disappear. The Silent Mayday had spoken. The third day began in silence. No wind, no sound of the sea, just a stillness that felt unnatural. The survivors of Flight 472 were weak, hungry, and sunburned, but still holding on to one thing: hope. The captain sat near the wreck, eyes fixed on the lifeless ocean. The radio beside him emitted faint static like a heartbeat struggling to continue. Every few hours, a broken transmission whispered through, coordinates, half-words, echoes of something real. He tried to mark the sounds on his map, but the compass needle refused to stay still. The island seemed to shift, as if the ground itself was drifting over an unseen current. The co-pilot climbed the rocks again, scanning the horizon through binoculars. There, between waves and sunlight, a faint shape appeared, metallic, distant, moving. For a moment, he thought it was a ship. They signaled with mirror flashes, burning the sunlight toward the sea. No response. The shape didn't approach. It simply circled, silent, observing. Then it vanished into fog. The captain checked the emergency flares. Only 2 left. If that was a rescue vessel, they had one last chance. He waited for dusk. As the sun dipped low, turning the ocean into molten orange, he fired the first flare. The red light soared, bursting above the cliffs. The passengers watched in silence, tears in their eyes. For a brief moment, hope lit the air. Then a sound, deep and mechanical, rolling through the mist. The ocean began to stir again, waves rising with unnatural rhythm. The beacon on the cliff, once dead, flickered back to life, pulsing in perfect sync with the vibrations below. The captain froze. That wasn't a rescue ship. It was the island and awakening again. The sand near the wreck began to tremble. Metallic fragments emerged from beneath, like veins of steel surfacing through the earth. The water turned darker, swirling in circles that mirrored radar scans. The co-pilot shouted for everyone to move uphill. They grabbed what little they had left and ran toward the higher ridges as the tide devoured the beach. From above, they watched in horror as the remains of Flight 472 slowly tilted and disappeared beneath the foaming sea, dragged downward by invisible force. The beacon pulsed faster, the sound deepening into a hum that resonated through their bones. And then the sea opened. Through the waves, massive shadows shifted below, machinery, towers, cables, all rising for a brief moment before sinking again. The island was not an island at all. It was a structure, ancient and hidden, a listening station built to capture lost signals, now eroding into the deep. It was never meant to be found. As the last part of the fuselage vanished beneath the waves, the radio crackled once more. This time, a clear voice came through the static. It was calm, distant, official, but slightly wrong, like an echo from another time. Flight 472, signal received. Maintain position. Rescue inbound. The captain stared at the radio. Rescue inbound, but how could they know? Their transponder was destroyed, their coordinates unknown. The co-pilot pointed toward the sea. In the fog, the same metallic silhouette reappeared, this time closer. It wasn't a ship. It was a drone aircraft, unmanned, covered in rust and coral, its propellers moving unevenly. The markings were faded but still visible. Orpheus 03, the same name as the beacon. The drone hovered, scanning the cliffs. Its lens glowed red, the same color as the beacon light. It circled once, transmitting signals through the air, then drifted away toward the horizon. The radio continued to speak, repeating the same message again and again. But with each repetition, the words distorted, fading into a whisper. Rescue inbound. Inbound, inbound. The voice collapsed into static, then silence. Night fell. The stars above were bright, unnaturally so, scattered like diamonds across black water. The captain looked upward, thinking of home, of control towers, of runways, of all the voices he used to hear every day. Now there was only one voice left, the oceans. He closed his eyes, trying to remember the moment they first lost control. That blinding red alarm, that frozen navigation, that silence in the cockpit before impact. It all began with one thing, a signal they followed. The same signal that had lured countless others before them. Days passed. No ship arrived. No aircraft appeared. Food ran out, water dwindled, and the survivors began to weaken. The sea was calm again, as if nothing had ever happened. But each night, from beneath the cliffs, a low hum could be heard, faint, steady, mechanical. The beacon was alive again, On the 5th day, the captain made a decision. He took the remaining flare, climbed to the highest ridge, and waited until the moon rose. He fired it one last time into the sky, a desperate final signal. The flare burst above the mist, its red glow spreading over the sea. For a second, everything was still. Then, far on the horizon, another red light answered. Faint, synchronized, pulsing slowly in reply. The captain lowered his head. It wasn't rescue. It was the echo. The same looped transmission playing forever. Machines calling to machines, waiting for voices that would never return. The next morning, the waves erased all footprints. The island stood silent again. Weeks later, a search team flying over the Pacific detected a faint Mayday signal repeating every 30 seconds. They triangulated the source. But when they reached the coordinates, there was only open ocean. No island, no wreckage, no survivors. Yet the recording continued best the captain's voice repeating in broken fragments. Mayday. Flight 472, position unknown. Descending. It never stopped. To this day, deep-sea scanners sometimes pick up the same echo beneath the surface, a signal looping endlessly from a forgotten transmitter marked Project Orpheus. And in that silence, beneath miles of dark water, the ghosts of lost transmissions keep calling, each one waiting to be heard, each one still whispering. The Silent Mayday.